Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwikta.
This is Merps. It's a new beginning for me, and I like to think it's a new beginning for, the arena in many ways, but it's kind of not. Anyways, I am in the middle of a transition. I'm moving to a new apartment. For those of you watching on YouTube, this is not my new apartment. It is because Verizon completely messed up. I have no internet at my place, and I am at my buddy Nathan's apartment, and he kindly offered, his gaming room, so I could bring you guys all the latest in Hearthstone Arena.
I think I think you're right that it is kind of a transitional period, not just for you and your move, but also for Hearthstone Arena at least. Just because we're kind of like I always find myself when playing in Witchwood, like not knowing what's about to happen. Like I felt more secure in 10.4 before Witchwood because I knew nothing was really going to happen until Witchwood. I had that like period of like, oh, for the next 3 months we're in this meta. I can like get good at this meta. I can interpret things on this meta. Here we had Witchwood for like I don't know, like a week and a half, and then they updated the buckets, and reduced the power levels by a little bit, and we've had that now for like 2.5 weeks,
Yeah.
and it's still not good. And I don't think anybody, or not anybody, but I don't think you can find like 80%, like, sorry, I don't think you can find 20% of people who, play Arena a lot to come together and say, like, right now we have a very good product, Blizzard. You can, like, really stop tweaking until the next expansion. Like, we're pretty good. Like, you can improve it, but there's really no need to tweak it. No one's going to say that. Who knows what they're doing?
Nope.
And I think it's popped up in a couple of threads on Reddit. A crypt that made a video about it. I think a lot of the the conversation going on there is a little off. Like I don't think everyone understands mechanically what's happening in 10.4. Which is totally fair. I mean, if you are not the most hardcore arena uh, arena scientist, let's say, not even arena players, like some arena players don't even know what's going on, right? Like on the details. Like one thing I noticed about Crip's video is that he doesn't really fully understand how the bucketing system works. Like he kind of knows what he doesn't know, but
Right.
but
Yeah.
he doesn't like some of the questions that he's asking, or like they're already answered, or like everyone, or like the people who have been digging into the bucket system more, they know what the answer is, whether it's a good answer or a bad answer, or if it should be changed. But there are answers to a lot of the questions he's asking, and it really shows that. I mean, here's someone who's one of the, not only the most, like, the highest volume, one of the highest volume arena players, but also one of the most vocal people in the arena community. And really, whenever something's going wrong, cripple stand out there and say it. And it's very obvious to him, as it is, I think, to most people in the community, that something's wrong. And parts of the reason is going to be this like power level. Crip phrased his whole thesis is arena's becoming more like constructed. There's a ton of like these constructed level cards being added to the arena, and it's ruining the arena. And then there's a whole bunch of sub points with like rare cards, with certain particular cards that are seen more often, and we'll talk about some of those. But like for the most part, it's that there are too many good cards and not enough of these crappy cards that we used to see a lot in the arena. And people can agree or disagree with him on that, but it's true. Like there are a lot more good cards. You see Steeds everywhere. You've seen Steeds everywhere for 2 months now. It's gotten from like, oh, Blizzard's fiddling around with it, to, oh, I guess Blizzard's okay with the current amount of Steeds in the arena because they've fixed Steeds like 3 times now.
Right. And look, once Blizzard decided that they were going down this path, that they were going down this bucketing system, that they were going to make drafts matter, we sort of knew that this would kind of happen, right? That there would be this really painful adjustment period, growing period. And we're in it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so it's not so much that this exists, this should exist, this has to exist, right? In order, and Blizzard basically made the leap. Like they could have kept things the way they were and sort of not put themselves out there, but they really put themselves out there. And once you introduce something like this, you need to back it up with a lot of follow-up work,
And
right?
they have. I've been pretty
Yeah.
impressed with the speed in which they do some of the changes, but we are in that kind of a lull, right? It has been more than 2 weeks since they made a change, and I think
Hmm.
people who are sitting around and playing Arena all the time are looking at Blizzard now and say, "Hey, we're okay when you were making all these changes and the product was a very imperfect product because we see where you're going with it." But now that you haven't touched it for a while, now the flaws are getting a little more apparent and we're a little more bothered by it. Like, are you changing these things? The point that I hate the most, which is Steed related somewhat, is that remember micro adjusts? And in case people were like, oh, now with the bucket system, there's no more micro adjusts. That's so not true. Um, we haven't focused on this a lot on the Lightforge. I mean, we've said it, we've never talked about it as if it weren't true, but we like to generalize because you can't talk about 1,000 cards without generalizing. And one of the generalizations we make are with offering rates and what the expected offering rates should be for every card. Based on the bucketing system that Blizzard has put out, and then fudged a little depending on which bucket it's in. But since the very beginning, and we've all known this, and this is the only way that some of the things can happen, like, for example, Blizzard, the card, not the company. And it's that the bucketing, there's still random micro adjusts going on. I'm sure it's not random. I'm sure Blizzard has the thumb on the scale on certain things. But the same type of card in the same bucket will have different offering rates. So, like, a class minion in bucket 3 will not have the same offering rate as another class minion in bucket 3. And it's not a small percentage. Sometimes it's like one card will be randomly like 5 times offered as frequently as the other cards. Like, sometimes it's a little more nuanced than that. And the ratios between like weapons and spells and minions, that's not the same either. That's not just Blizzard pitches 1.75 times, right? That's what it should be. That's how they write it out in their patch notes. That's not true. It's almost never 1.75 times. It's always a little less or a little more. It's not too wide, but like sometimes when it gets to be a little less, it's less than 50%, right? There's always like a little bit of an increase, but the little bit of an increase could be like 25 to 33%. Whereas other times it will be literally like double. And it's not like, oh, in bucket 3 Blizzard does it this way. No, it's in bucket 3 of Paladin Blizzard does it this way, and bucket 3 of Druid Blizzard does it this other way. And it's not like all Paladins are consistent or all bucket 3s are consistent.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is and this is sort of just the artifacts from all the previous changes that they've sort of thrown in with the bucket system, right? So you have the increase in spells and also just the micro adjusts, which you're right, we haven't talked about a lot, but yes, micro adjusts are still there. And have you seen changes to the micro adjusts recently?
Like in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, yeah.
Not that, I mean, I don't know that if they did micro adjust it, we would catch it immediately, right? Because I'm just taking stats from people who provide stats. I'm not I'm not the one with my finger on the stat collecting controlling machine.
Right.
But yeah, I assume not. Blizzard hasn't said they micro adjusted anything.
Okay, yeah. But anyways, the effects of micro adjusts are still seen. So at least we know that.
So that's one of the starting points I want to make for offering rates. So for people who, if you're wondering, right, one of the most obvious things in the arena when you're playing against mage is that mages always have Blizzard. And when a class always has a particular card, you may think, okay, so the class always has a particular card. Why? It's probably misbucketed, right? That's a clear reason why a class would always have a particular card. It's misbucketed. Everybody picks that card. Elven Minstrel, I think Crip highlighted, that's one of the misbucketed cards where it's bucketed lower than super premium, and people treat it as a super premium card. So they're always going to take it, and so you're going to see a lot of them. But that does not explain the full difference. Like Elven Minstrel's a minion, for example, and Crip very, clearly pointed out, like, hey, there are other misbucketed, I mean, he didn't put it this way, but basically there are other misbucketed cards, and you don't see them as often as you see Elven Minstrel. And Elven Minstrel is not even like that misbucketed, right? Like the difference
Right.
between the
Yeah.
first bucket and the third bucket is not like the largest thing in the world when you average them out. And you factor in Blizzard's not being totally correct about the bucketing to begin with. You kind of you're not getting that much value. You would still do it, but it's not as stark as some of the other misbucketings where Blizzard will take a premium card and put it in bucket 5, and you're like, what? But yeah, but that's why you see a lot of Elven Minstrels. And Blizzard, the card, you see a ton of. Not just because it's misbucketed. It's not even misbucketed. It's bucketed in bucket 2. That's pretty much what Blizzard should be bucketed, right? Like, I think, you know what Blizzard does. You've had it around forever. Which bucket would you put Blizzard in? Probably the second bucket. We'd probably put it in the second bucket, maybe even the third bucket. Like, it's not particularly good for its bucket. It's fine where it is. But yet everybody picks it. Now, do people just really, really, really like Blizzard? I don't think so. At least, just speaking with Twitch chat and being a streamer, there doesn't seem to be a huge meme with how great Blizzard is. Or like, oh, Blizzard's so fun, we're always going to take Blizzard. There's none of that going on with Blizzard. So, a relatively normal amount of Blizzards per what it's offered against is taken. And yet you end up with this expectation that Blizzards are everywhere. And why is that? And the reason for that is that Blizzard is offered more often than other rare spells in its bucket.
That makes sense. I mean, I do see it a ton. I've certainly been like triple Blizzarded, 3 turns in a row.
Yeah. So if these numbers are not consistent, we have kind of a problem. And the problem is not necessarily like, oh, there's too many Blizzards. I don't know if that's really a meta problem, but we have a problem in that nobody knows what's going on, and no one can know what's going on, right? And that's kind of partly, I think, Crip's main thesis is about decks being too good, but he also seems really annoyed that he doesn't know what's going on and he can't play the way he wants to play and still, like, win. Because he'll think, oh, well, the chances for this crazy thing to happen is so low, and then it happens. And if you're a good arena player and you're trying to adjust to what kinds of things you're expecting to happen, you need these kinds of numbers, because you're not going to be able to Monte Carlo yourself like 10,000 simulations, right? That's not something that even the most dedicated arena player can pull off.
Right. And I think this is something that, we talked about basically right when Micro Adjust came out, right? And I was like, okay, because a lot of people might not care about this stuff. And I'm like, I think just on a foundational level, people like get frustrated at stuff that is hidden from them, right? And when you get to the tippy top, like the people that play this a ton, and if they're going for the leaderboard, or even if they're not going for the leaderboard, they just play a lot like Crip and take pride in the fact that they're good at the game. I'm like, you're going to annoy a lot of these people. Maybe not at that point, but eventually you're going to reach a breaking point in which the lack of information and the amount of effort required in order for them to obtain the information in a meaningful way, right? Like, and like obtain the information and process it in a meaningful way to impact gameplay. I'm like, they're going to get really frustrated. And that's, I think, what we see out of
Crip. I think we've hit that point right now. Crip is like, Crip ended the video saying, I'm going to go study hsreplay.com. And I believe him. I think he's going to sit down and click through like every single card and like resort them in different ways and figuring out what he's going to be expecting in the arena. Because like, as he said, like his win rate is down quite significantly. He is having less fun in the arena because he doesn't really know what's going on. And as someone who's, usually if you're a top player, in especially in the arena, oddly, I think the more randomness is in your game mode, the more of a control freak the top players are. Because they need to grasp at every single like area that you can get control in, because you just have to accept that so much of it is random. Anyway, he's going to go and study all that, and that's something that I know a lot of players have been doing, and these stats keep changing, and you keep studying it. I myself have put in many hours studying HS replay stats because that is the largest, that's the best stats available to the public right now. And we've gotten arena draft stats that which other people can't even see. And arena draft stats speak to actual offering rates, not just cards played or cards seen in deck. So it gets rid of the human selection factor, although they have a smaller data set than the HS replay. But anyway, this is what you kind of have to do. And if, to the extent that we could have told you before, here's how you draft because this, keep in mind, rare cards are less frequently seen than common cards, which hasn't been true for a year. But maybe spells are seen more often, expansion cards, which, by the way, this expansion does not seem like it has an expansion bonus. Mm-hmm. I've still yet to be able to get anybody to confirm that to me. But so far, just from me drafting, that's how it feels. We can't tell you anything like that with more than 80% certainty. 80% of the time, what we say is within a 5% margin of error. The other 20%, randomly, we can't tell you which 20%. It's just this rule is going to break down. So how do you deal with the meta when that's your offering rates? You hit the frustration point, right? Especially if you're trying to find a organizational method to be able to take all of this information and turn it into gameplay strategies.
Right. So I'm wondering, there's a couple of things in consideration here. Number one, you could think the reason that Blizzard doesn't give out numbers is because they are unsure of the numbers themselves, right? And through this sort of Frankenstein creation process, they are not even really sure what's going on, but they're just carrying the baggage, mm-hmm. right? And they just keep on continuing this. Another reason is just because, they don't want to give people numbers because it's confusing or it's just too burdensome for people, right? Or they don't want to put it out there and give people the option, because if you give people the option and they don't take it, some people might feel bad, right? Yeah. So if you don't give anyone the option, a lot of players that know about this, but then they recognize, oh, it's not out there, they don't feel as bad. They're like, well, no one has it, so that's cool. But once again, it's a balance, right? For each person that feels good about it not being out there, so that they don't have to, take the initiative to do it. There are people that feel really bad because they have to. It's not like this information is unobtainable in any way. It just takes an extraordinary amount of work in order to get it, and then to transform that into information in which you can use, and then to keep on updating it every 2 weeks, because that's actually necessary for the changes. So, you reach this sort of point where who are you trying to appease here? And are they even thinking about this at all? Or are they just being no, we just don't want to give it out? I have no idea, right? I'm not sure what their incentives or motives are, but at the same time, I'm not even sure if they're doing this sort of cost benefit analysis here.
Yeah, I mean, they could have just thought of a cool system, did the little testing, and thought, hey, this is better than what we had before. Let's roll it out, make sure there's as few bugs as possible, and then re-bucket once we get more stats. And now we're done with that. And now they don't really have a plan. Or, and here's, my issue with the bucket system is I think it's a weird position for Blizzard to take if they're not going to release what the buckets are. Because that's the only benefit of buckets, is for easy understandability. Otherwise, Blizzard has an algorithm here. They have a tier list. They should just offer a card and then give a range of what the other cards should be, right? So if my Prime card is rated 80 on a Blizzard tier list, well, I can go plus 15% up or plus 15% down from that card. That's my card pool, rerun the odds, offer those, right? That's not hard at all to create once you have the official Blizzard tier list that is hidden that no one knows about done, instead of this whole bucketing thing. And I will get rid of some things, things that are misbucketed can be pretty easily spotted that way and moved up, even in real time. But they're not if they're not doing that, it's either because they're not there yet and we're going to get there, which is, I think I probably support that, even if it means permanent loss of clarity on our end. just because you avoid the problem of things being at the lowest in the bucket, right, or the highest in the bucket. But if you can't move it to a different bucket, it solves a pretty fundamental issue with buckets. But yeah, the other option is that they like the bucket system because it is easier to grasp for people and for players. But if that's why they're keeping the bucket system, where's the information? Where use the benefits of the system?
Yeah, that's really the thing that I don't understand. Like they seem to be using the bucket system, but they're almost ignoring like more than 50% of what makes the bucket system good,
Yep.
you know? Like on a basic level, they're using the fact that the bucket system, like number one, it makes people make actual choices or significantly more choices than before, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're not using, well, like you said, one of the opportunities here is to help even out the decks,
Yep.
right? Like even out the scores or just the overall goodness of the decks. They don't seem to be using that. They also don't seem to be using the bucket system as a better, more cohesive fix for all of these previous fixes, right? The
Yep.
spell bonus, the micro adjust, all of these things. And instead, they just like carried them over.
It's the
So,
next step, and the
yeah.
question is whether they view it as a next step, which means Blizzard's going to take like another 4 months to implement it, or if they view it as part of 10.4, in which case it could be coming at any time. Um, anyway, the other issue I tweeted about this before, which is kind of a derivative of this, is that now that we're in 10.4, Blizzard seems to have forgotten all the benefits of the work that they did in micro adjusting. Right? They're still micro adjusting, but now they're somehow not taking class balance into consideration. I don't know what they're doing, what they're thinking, whether the systems are clashing or whether there's just like big issues over there that they are not. They're obviously not advertising that there are big issues there with the system, but that they can't make this happen. But if you've been playing the arena, Paladin's been dominant for like 2 months now.
Yep.
Paladin's been dominant since 10.4 came out. Since the very first day 10.4 came out, Paladin's been above 54% win rate. It stayed there. It hasn't moved through every single adjustment made to 10.4. And some of them were somewhat specifically targeted at Paladins too, and the win rates still haven't really gone down. They've gone down by like 1% from the height in Witchwood. And like, what are you doing, Blizzard? This is not new stuff. This is stuff you've been doing like since June of last year to make like warriors okay, and now you have a more sophisticated system. You can micro adjust individual cards. You can just take the like highest few buckets of paladin and like reduce them all. Like you can do so many things, right? And in Witchwood so far, we're talking about Hunter. Hunter has been below 45% for the entire time. Hunter's an unplayable class right now. It's as low as, okay, it's not as low as Warrior used to be, but it's pretty damn close to how low Warrior used to be right now. And there's easy ways to fix that. Blizzard has the tools. They're just, for some reason, not using them. It's weird.
Yeah, I mean, one of the simplest ways is just by looking at, if you look at Taro's spreadsheet, right, you can see that hunters, like, their chances of getting like the S tier bucket, right? It's not very high. I forget what it is, but I think paladins have a higher chance of getting their S tier bucket.
Yeah,
Than
paladins have a
hunters.
normal. The thing with the S tier buckets, paladins and mage actually have normal like S tier bucket chances to get. I think Rogue has a slight penalty to it, and Rogue is still number 2.
Rogue does, yeah.
I think they put a penalty on Priest that they hadn't quite gotten rid of yet from back when Priest was like dominant. So now Priest is not dominant, and they could probably now no longer have it. Like, we're not complaining mostly because Priest is with everybody else, right? So, but it still remains that they are doing things. They're just not updating them as far as we can see.
Right. So one of the simple things they could do is just like, hey, Hunter, you get to select more often from your better buckets, right? Like that could be just one thing that they could do. That's it's the newest tool, like sort of pull the lever on your newest tool and then make hunters just a little bit better. That's definitely like one thing that's out there for them.
Yeah. All right. So that's the overall meta talk. It's so hard to talk about the arena now because it's going to keep changing. It's going to change week to week. Anything we tell you now may not really apply if we talk about specifics. So last week we talked about Paladin and Rogue because they are what's dominant in the meta, and if Blizzard doesn't change, those are either your primary opponents that you need to deal with, or they are the classes, and they are the classes that you should definitely be drafting. Let's move on to a deep fried meta. So the one I picked for deep fried meta this week, it's a theory point, and I wanted to do a theory point rather than a practical point about the specific meta, because I don't think the specific meta point is going to be useful for more than like a week. Like Blizzard's going to rebucket, they're going to change some things, they're going to probably micro adjust. I hope they micro adjust. It's getting to the point where it's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of ridiculous how long Paladin's been allowed to be at the top for. And for people who are wondering like whether 54% is like a really high win rate, for average, it's insanely high. Firelance Portal Mage was like, I think 55, maybe 56. And we all knew how oppressive that was. So 54 and above is still pretty oppressive range. And you see it, right? If you play in the arena, you know Paladins are oppressive right now. Some of which they can fix just by bucketing like Equality and Silver Sword correctly. Like,
yeah,
why? Those are not terribly. I mean, I guess it's just like bad players messing up the data for Blizzard, so Blizzard doesn't think these cards are great. But when it gets to the top, when you get to like your 10 plus runs, they're usually good players. Like, they're overwhelmingly good players compared to bad players at that point. And they all know how to use Silver Sword and Equality, and so they will. It's this fundamental tension. Anyway, deep fried meta, 1 drops versus 2 drops versus no drops. I get this question a lot. I don't know about you when you're streaming and drafting, and that is, do I take 1 drops? Do I take 2 drops? Do I not take either 1 or 2 drops and just focus on 3 drops and start my curve there? And some people, and I heavily advise against this in this meta, but some people are like, why don't I take 1 drops and 2 drops? Like, a lot of 1 and 2 drops. I'm playing Zoo or I'm playing Aggro.
I've
want
tried
these drops.
that. And then I went 0-3.
It's horrible. Please don't do it. And I'll show you why not to do it. I'm going to map this out for you guys. This is why it doesn't work. This is why having 1 and 2 drops in this meta does not work. And in prior metas, if you remember the metas in which having 1 and 2 drops did work, it doesn't work in this way. If you have 1 and 2 drops, your curve ends at 4. You have 1 drops, you have 2 drops, you have 3 drops, you have like maybe 2 4 mana actual drops, and then the rest of your cards are utility cards. And you end the game by turn 6. That's your whole entire game plan. And you may wonder, okay, so you understand why that game plan doesn't work in this meta, right? Like, you have Witchwood Grizzly, like enough said. You have all these other cards, right? These Steeds, like there's Apple Bomb, like all of these cards that you didn't have before, just stopping aggro dead. Lone Champ itself, which is also slightly misbucketed. It's slightly lower bucketed, although they've kind of fixed that. So now it's just like at the top range of the correct bucket rather than actually misbucketed. Mm-hmm. But those are all showstoppers if you're an aggro deck, like a truly aggro deck. But anyway, back to the numbers. Here are things that you absolutely need for this meta. I fundamentally believe you cannot build a functioning deck that is not like the most synergy heavy deck ever, or like you got offered so many high bucket cards. Like, other decks don't win in this meta. Okay, Warlock may be an exception because of the hero power. I'm not going to extend this discussion exactly to Warlock, but anyone else. And that is, you need a curve, I think what I call the standard curve of 5 3 drops, maybe a little more than 5, 4 4 drops, maybe a little more than 4, 3 5 drops, and then like 1.5 6 drops. They add a total to 14 cards. That's the backbone of your run. These are drops. They don't do stuff, right? Like, they could be better, they could be worse, they could have taunt, they could be missing a stat, they could have an additional stat. They may have a random ability that doesn't really do much. Maybe if they hit some kind of synergy, they do amazing things, but otherwise you just use them as drops.
Sure.
14 cards. That's 14 slots. Done. And for the most part, they don't really have initiative. You may get one or two exceptions in there with initiative, but for the most part, if it's a drop, it doesn't have initiative. Then you have 3 large cards that are 7 mana or above. Like, you want at least 3. They're not necessarily minions. They could be any kind of large card. They're your foundation for having card advantage to be able to last an appropriate amount of length in the game. It could be a Volcanosaur, it could be a Silver Sword. It's a stuff with a lot of card advantage, right? It could be a sprint even, mind control. And then you have 3 utility cards. I would say draft as few utility cards as absolutely possible, but you don't really have a choice sometimes. Like, you just end up where, like, you have to take utility cards because that's what you're offered. You're given, like, curve cards in curve areas you don't need, or, like, bad cards, or, like, the utility cards you're talking about is, like, a little harder to play and therefore misbucketed, and so you get a lot of value for taking it. So what are utility cards? Any kind of card draw. Utility cards are basically anything that's not, like, extremely large, not a curve card, and not a removal. Like, card draw is the bulk of it, right? Like, a card draw that is not a curve card. So, like, a Gnomish Inventor, for example, is a utility card. Arcane Intellect's a utility card. Blessing of Wisdom, those are your simple card draw ones. Cycle cards are utility cards. Same way, you draw a card, right? Like, Shiv is a utility card. Hallucination's a utility card. Just flat out bad cards that you had to take because you got a crap bucket. Those are considered utility cards. If you have a Nightblade, right?
God.
It's a crappy card, but you sometimes take it. It's not a 5-drop. What is it? It's a utility card. It has no real utility, but you bucket it with the utility cards. It just basically...
Even when the utility is bad, it's still a utility card.
Yeah, it's still a utility card, right? Like, sometimes you just get bad cards. Or you have a card that's like a high synergy card, right? Those are also utility cards. Let's say I can't think of one off. The mage one that's 4 mana 3/3, but if you play with a secret, it becomes a 5/5.
Ethereal Conjurer, or no, not Conjurer.
Wow.
Yeah.
PTSD.
Ethereal Conjurer. That was a fun card. Anyways, Arcanist.
Yeah. So that would be an example of a synergy-based utility card. Anything delayed is also a utility card. So, for example, like Counterspell is a utility card. Wandering Monster is a utility card. Yeah. So all those things, you're going to get a couple of them. And this is in my drafting style, which is like you try to draft as few of these cards as absolutely possible unless you're getting extreme value out of them. And the reason I draft as few of these as possible is because after you have these, the bare minimum utility cards you can get away with in a draft, your 3 large cards so that you don't run out of steam, a bare bones curve, you already have 20 cards in your deck. And you have 10 remaining cards. And what I haven't put into your deck yet are removals. Yep. Which are not only very important, but they're also usually your really good cards, right? Most really good cards are removals. Most of the high bucketed cards are either a minion with a removal attached to it or just a removal period. So you're going to want them not only because they're good, but because they kind of like drive your deck a lot of the times. And you're not going to get a lot of removals from these other cards. Remember, your curve cards are probably not going to have initiative. Your large cards could have initiative, but you only have 3 large cards. So like, let's say half of them have initiative. And your utility cards aren't really going to have initiative for the most part. Some utility cards do, usually like buffs, like multi-buffs, for example. Like, Bloodlust is a utility card, but I guess it has initiative. So what do you end up? With those 10 categories left, you end up with like 3, maybe 4 initiative cards at best.
Yeah.
And you need at a minimum 8 cards with initiative to even be in the game past like 7 wins. I can't remember the last time I took a deck with less than 8 cards with initiative past 7 wins. Like,
it also just doesn't exist, or like it shouldn't exist because of the bucketing system, right? Like, they give you a lot of, like, whenever you select from the better buckets, a lot of times it is initiative, whether it's removal or just sort of like a pseudo removal or anything. So you pick those cards a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the value propositions now, like, you gotta take where you can get it. So yeah, that leaves you, if you want a bare bones 8 cards with initiative, that leaves you with exactly 6 cards for either 1 or 2 drops. And that's your curve. That's your most aggressive possible in this meta curve. You have bare bones 8 cards with initiative. You have your kind of curve with 1 mana or 2 mana cards, and then you have the rest of your curve, and then you have a deck. That's your basic mid-range deck. Now, what if you don't take 1s or 2s? I mean, you're probably going to be forced into a couple of 1s or 2s, but then you have up to like 4, maybe even 6 additional removals. Or utility cards, but really removals. You may want to add like 1 additional 3-drop just to be sure, right? Like, especially if you don't have 1 or 2 drops. But for the most part, you're getting a lot more removals, and those are your power cards. Remember, as Merp said. Yep. So you get a lot of actual value for not having 1s or 2s. Now, of course, if you don't start with 1 or 2 and you are going first, you are not able to take advantage of the fact that you're going first, and that could have consequences. Especially because when you're going first, even your small removals can't be used because you're the one frostbolting onto into his nothing before he coins out a 3-drop. So you don't really get to do that. So this is a fundamental reason why paladins and rogues are so powerful, like overall as classes in any meta, and it's because you don't need 2s. You can just play a 1 in dagger or play a 1 in the hero power, and then you kind of have your 2-drop. And so you can only take 1s. And in that sense, you have your whole curve built out. You don't lose a lot of tempo. So the real choice, I think, is between having 1-drops or 2-drops. And the benefit of 2-drops is that going first, 2-drops are better than 1-drops, always. Like, put Paladin and Rogue aside, right? You just have a 2-3 or a 3-2 rather than a 2-1. Like, that's just better. The good part about 1-drops is that going second, 1-drops are better than 2-drops oftentimes because 3s are super powerful these days. You can 1 coin 3 into 3. Whereas if you had a 2-drop, it's really awkward. A lot of times right now when I'm mulliganing, I actually mulligan away 2s because I'm trying to get coin 3 into 3. Because I don't have enough 2s to coin 2 into 2 into 3. So...
yeah, I think it's good to point out this big power gap in terms of like between 2 and 3-drops, right? I think we're at the point right now where the power level between sort of 2s and 3s are at its greatest point. You know, historically, when we looked at previous metas, like there was this power gap between like 3 and 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now, you know, with 3 mana 4/4s, lone champions, just with all of these like really good 3s, we're not even talking about stuff like Egg Napper, which is really annoying, right?
I'll put numbers into this.
Sure.
Above 110 in neutrals, we have 3 2-drops. Gastropod, Loot Hoarder, which is not a drop, so not Loot Hoarder, and Mad Bomber. So if Gastropod and Mad Bomber, that's 2 cards. On the 3-drop category, we have Basilisk, Stonehill, I'm not going to count Stonehill. So Basilisk, Dragon Slayer, Wasp, not going to count Acolyte of Pain, Phantom Militia, that's a highly rated card. It's not that great of a 3-drop, but it's functional as a 3-drop still, so it counts. Egg Napper, Tar Creeper, Emperor Cobra, Hildnir Frostrider, Lone Champion, Void Ripper, Blackwalled Pixie, Scarlet Crusader. Compared to 2 2-drops.
Yeah. 2-drops, I mean, Blizzard hasn't been focusing on them. So, you know, you see something like a Plated Beetle, right? Like, that's kind of what you're expecting on 2. But for 3, you have all of these really powerful cards. And especially, you know, the coin into the Lone Champion, you're just like, that's really good for your coin turn 2.
Now, keep in mind, 1-drops aren't any better than 2-drops, really. You have Glacial Shard and Atros Veteran that are really good. Argent Squire is your next best card, which kind of matches up on the power level with a lot of the actual 2-drops. But the difference between whether you take 1s and 2s is not really going to come down to like the decision of whether to have 1s or 2s at all versus 3-drops should, you know, you consider what you have to gain there, and then consider how bucketing works. Which is that 2s are always over bucketed because bad players do better when they have a curve than when they don't have a curve, because that's just how it's always been. Okay, so back to the fundamental question. Now that we know the pros and cons of having a 3 drop, starting your curve at 3 drops versus starting at 1/2. If you have 1 drops as a curve, it works well with 3. So going second, you're fine. So all 2 drops have left is going first. So 1 drops are better going second. 2 drops are better going first. Now, if you take later on in the game, right? 2 drops have a tiny bit more card advantage, but 1 drops have more tempo. Because remember, your card itself has a built-in tempo. A 0 mana card is a wisp. That's still a 1/1 on the board. So you can think of these units as like 0 mana has 1 unit of tempo, 1 mana has 2 units of tempo, 2 manas have 3 units of tempo. And if you think about it that way, then you gain a lot more tempo relatively for spending 1 mana using a 1 drop than a 2 drop. And it's easier to squeeze into on turns. A downside of 1 drops that a lot of times it has only 1 attack. Only 1 health, which means that it's very vulnerable to rogues and somewhat vulnerable to mages, which is not a good thing, depending on how many rogues and mages and druids you see in the meta. So normally when you build your curve, you don't care too much about 1 and 2 drops. But if you can, you want to go one way or the other. Like, if you're going first, right, and you have a 1 drop instead of a 2 drop, what's your gain there? You don't have a gain. If you're not paladin or rogue, you just lose out on 1 mana of tempo, right? You put on something on 1 and you do nothing on 2, like most of the time. But going second, you're fine. Now, what's your gain for having 2s if you go second? You get the option of 2 into 4, but you're still wasting your first mana. Or you may just coin 3/3 anyway, and then your 2 doesn't really do anything. So
yeah, and then it gets a decreased amount of value because you're playing it not on turn 2.
Yeah, and so you're looking around at this, and just overall, 2 drops are heavily not worth it from a bucketing perspective. And then when you compare it with 1 drops, which are less over bucketed, because 1 drops actually, for whatever reason, 1 drops are not as good in average players' hands as they are in good players' hands, even though you would think that if your point is to curve out, 1 drops are better. But I think average players don't know how to draft a deck with 1 drops. Like, they over 1 drop, for example, or they try to do the thing where they have 1 drops and 2 drops and 3 drops and 4 drops and like aggro out, and it just doesn't work. Whereas good players usually know not to do that in this meta. But anyway, for whatever reason, the 1 drop bucketing is a lot nicer. And so as an overall recommendation, this is why you hear me say on stream a lot, and I draft this way a lot. It's I don't draft 2 drops unless I need to. Like, unless the other cards are such crap or so not fitting my deck, or like I already have my 3 and 4 and 5 drops, and those are the other 2 cards that are offered. Or like I desperately need a 1/2 drop, or else I'm going to fall behind when going first. Like by way too much, because I only have 4 1 or 2 drops and I have only 3 cards left. Like, and then I get offered a 2 drop.
Right.
Fine. Like, it's just a crappy version of a 1 drop.
Yeah. Every time you pick that Amani Berserker, every time you pick, like the Mad Bomber, for instance, you are going to be giving up some value just based on the tier list. And sometimes you need that, right? You need that 2 drop, and the curve consideration will make up for, you sort of reaching down for that. But it's one of the reasons why you can't have 2 as sort of the backbone of your deck. Not that you want it anyways. And, Adult's discussion was even talking about sort of non-rogue and non-paladins, right? And when you introduce those 2 classes, like with for them, 1 drops are so good because a 1 drop in combination with their hero power, it just makes a 2 drop already. So you don't even have to think about 2s, and you get the flexibility of 1 drops, and the fact that 1 drops are just like pretty good, right? Like,
And that happens sometimes too with mage and druid as well, right? Like if your
yeah,
opponent
yeah,
does go out faster, does coin out a 2-drop, or something, you have something to ping, right? Even if they don't coin out a 2-drop, even if on turn 2 they play like a novice engineer, you're like, hey, I have a ping target.
right, right. So that's I think that's definitely the way to go. So you've sort of established now if it's between ones and twos, you can't do both because then you're devoting so many cards to ones
Mm-hmm.
and twos, and that's just it's not a winning strategy,
Yeah.
right? So and between those, probably go for ones, and if you're paladin or rogue, you definitely should go for ones.
Mm-hmm.
When do you go for none?
You go for none. I never go for none right off the bat
Right.
because the meta's still a bit fast. Not that just because in 10.4 you get to make the deck you want to make. So some people still want to make aggro decks. They're not going to go far, but they're going to be in the meta. And you can't lose to them. Because otherwise, if you're too slow and you don't have the appropriate taunts and board clears and heals, then you're going to be overrun by those decks and you're going to take the loss. And we're not at a point in the meta. I mean, we're at a point in the meta where if you have 8 wins, you don't have to worry about aggro decks. But
Right.
before that, you still have to worry about them. And so it's never worth it to me to start off the run and say, oh, I'm going to not have ones or twos. But if it's later towards the draft and I only have, let's say, like 1-1-drop and no 2-drops, I may say, all right, well, whatever. If I take another 1-drop, it'll be tempo, just purely for tempo. I'm never going to take a 2-drop. And I'm going to focus on making sure I'm going to take like an extra 3-drop or 2 to make sure that I can at least be okay going second on the 3s. And I'm going to take extra taunts. I'm going to take extra heals. Like, that's when I switch. It's a backup for me because I think your best decks in this meta all have 1-drops. Your best decks in this meta go 1-drop, no 2-drop, 3-drops in every single class that has a hero power that does anything. Warlock, again, may be problematic because you don't have to worry about... like, if you're on the board, you save your health, and then you don't really have to worry about your card advantage because you can hero power. That's always been the case. So, take Warlock aside, and even Warlock works without 2-drops. I've had many, like, mediocre decks with Warlock that don't have 2-drops that go more than 7. Like, it's a totally viable way to play, but I can't recommend it as, like, the best way to play Warlock. But for all the other classes, that's Mage, that's Druid, and that's weird for Druid. Druid's problem is that they have a lot of really, really, really good 2-drops. So you're gonna want to balance that with like not giving up too much value. And so as Druid, I often feel like sadly compelled to take some 2-drops based on value alone. But you try to have more 1-drops than 2-drops. Mage, definitely. You want to do that with Paladin and Rogue, definitely, as you said, and usually with Shaman as well. I found I would prefer 1-drops over 2-drops. So Hunters are just, there's nothing you can do with it. There's no way, right? Like once you're in the middle of this discussion, you realize what a bad spot Hunter is in, because Hunters have always needed 1-drops. There has never
and 2-drops.
And 2-drops. Yeah, they needed 1-drops and 2-drops, and now we've just come out and said, okay, it doesn't work if you have 1-drops and 2-drops. You don't have enough room for other cards. So what do you do as a hunter? You create a mediocre deck. That's what you do, and that's what hunters do, and they don't do very well generally. You have to have a really good deck that synergizes and does a bunch of other stuff. Your bar's way higher. But also warriors. Warriors have a similar issue in that their 2-mana card isn't as great. So for warriors, I would take either 1 or 2 mana cards. I'd still prefer 1 mana cards, but a good 2 mana card is fine too. And what you really want to try to do is take like Woodcutter's Axe. That card is so good when it comes to filling the 2-drop spot because it's initiative and it's a 2-drop, right? Like weapons are great in that way. They're all drops and they have initiative, so you fill a lot of spots. But as warrior, totally viable to just start on 3 as well. Get your taunts in, get your heals / armors. There's plenty of armoring cards that you can draft now, and go to town with that. As warrior, also you get access to rush cards, which are the only cards that are both drops and initiative, like one of the only cards. So you have some ways like to kind of cheat your other parts of the curve and like make out some more card spots for these 1 or 2 drops. So I would recommend you have a curve as warrior as well. Am I missing any classes? Did I just like go down? Oh, priest. One of the reasons priest is bad right now, or relatively bad, is because priest is more on the board. You want to get on the board, but you have this 1-drop/2-drop problem. So with priest, I definitely recommend you have 1-drops. But I understand that it's difficult to get 1-drops, and that 1-drops generally are not as good in priest. So if you have a 2-drop curve, it's fine as well, like a 1/2-drop curve. But you gotta have a plan. Like these are, you're just really getting into the weaknesses of why these classes are weak now. So yeah, so 1-drop v 2-drop v none. And again, this is not meta dependent exactly. This is just pros and cons, right? Like what you need to give up to get what you need to get.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion because this is something in which I think people like to discuss this because it feels like something that's very much so in their control as well, right? And I think it is important that people identify this as important because this is where the snowball begins, right? Like what you do in the draft and what you play in the first few turns sets you up very well for how the rest of the game is going to go. Like, you don't necessarily, or it's hard for people to tell that they lost either in the draft or they lost.
It's destiny of the deck. You lose in the draft. You lose in the draft when you don't draft well, and part of not drafting well is either missing the curve or taking too much of a value dip by forcing yourself to have 2-drops, which are horrible in the way Blizzard bucketed them. So you gotta, like, I think one of the biggest arbitrage points is this 2-drop issue. Is how to get around drafting 2-drops. And there's good. Gastropod's a great. It's one of the misbucketed cards, right? So you see a Gastropod, you take a Gastropod. But that aside, most of the other 2-drops are over bucketed. You're just gonna have to live with that.
Sounds good.
All right. Do we have a question from the GOAT?
Question from the GOAT is basically just giving you guys an update on how things are going on my end, which is poorly, as you can see from my sniffling. Allergies are killing me, and man, really moving just stinks. It really just stinks. Like, big shout out to all my friends over here who helped me move. Like the move itself was very, very fast. Like, cause we just had a lot of people moving this stuff. And
did you like not have a moving company? You just like got friends?
No. I just got friends.
Oh, and wow. That saved a lot of money.
I saved a lot of money and I bought.
Did you move buildings or are you in the same building?
No, move buildings. The building literally next door.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the move itself was really quick. And I think like 9 people helping me. 9 friends in real life.
That's crazy. All 9 of them?
Well, I mean, you know them as soon as you pay them. Right? Like that's how. No. So I actually do know them. A lot of them I know from Pokemon Go, obviously. But
9 whole friends. Wow.
9 whole friends, indeed. No, it was good. Obviously,
we're gonna have to see some proof. I find that hard to believe.
No, they're too busy playing Pokemon Go the rest of the time. But yeah, I mean, like, so that was fine. But part of the reason I am not in my apartment right now is like Verizon totally screwed up. And I guess I'm like, eliminating any chance of a Verizon sponsorship here. But no, I was supposed to get like a TV service. They didn't send me the box. I was supposed to have my internet. Like I set up everything ahead of time. And then I called ahead 2 days just to make sure. I'm like, okay, so it's going to be good. They're like, oh yeah. Like, I don't know why you're calling. It's good to go. And then I get there and they're like, oh yeah, we didn't connect you at all. Like they're like, oh, can you like go into your, like closet and look at the box? I'm like, yeah, I'm looking at the box. They're like, so what's it like? So what's the status? I'm like, it's not connected. They're like, what do you mean? Can you connect it? I'm like, no. I'm like, there is an Ethernet cord coming out of the box and the rest of the cord is dangling out of my closet. and it's supposed to go into this hole in the wall and into like like someplace I can't access. But you guys did not
Into the
connect it
internet.
into the internet, into like the primordial goo in which everything happens. So yeah,
Yeah,
man.
for the record, and so we don't get sued by Verizon. During my move last year at around the same time, Verizon was great. Like I set it up, I showed up the next day. The guy came, super friendly, set everything up, and I had internet and I was streaming. And you guys know the whole got box thing for after that. So
I know.
you know,
Yeah, we could have used Gotbox a lot today, but no. Anyways, so hopefully I will get that set up very soon. Excited about it. I will make sure that once everything is set up, you guys will be able. It'll be like nothing changed. Like I'll have my setup, same mic, same webcam. The chinchillas will be in the background. New wheel, new cage.
ooh.
So more footage of the chinchillas, same amount of riots, but less noise.
Wow.
So, I know.
Wow, that
It's
is a crazy setup.
it's crazy. Everything's crazy. So, anyways, that's where I am right now, and unfortunately, because of that, I'll have to like take like half a day off work tomorrow at least in order to get everything set up. But anyways, that's where I'm at right now.
All right. All right. So Merp's moving across the street, I guess, or to the building next door. Not even across the street, right? Is there a street or are the building connected?
They're not connected. There's like a small alley in between.
Across the alley.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, let's go. Let's question from the goat, brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much. We are very behind in all of this stuff between the expansion launch and Merp's moving, so we will give the shout outs to the patrons in the next Lightforge. But thank you guys so much. We don't give you guys enough shout outs and credit, especially those who have been with us for like the longest time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. We're gonna end this on a card good bad because we haven't done a card good bad in a while. But the expansion's deep in here, and I want to talk about 2 expansion cards, kind of to make up for the card good bads. And they're ones we haven't talked about too much. And I want to use this to highlight our earlier discussion about offering rates. I'm going to start with Town Crier, which is a 1-mana 1/2 epic minion that says Battlecry, draw a rush minion from your deck. It's a great card. We rated it a 143. And I don't think anyone's really in disagreement with it. But you never see it.
Yeah, I never see it.
And part of the reason you never see it is because it is an epic minion, although it is still a class card. And part of the reason you never see it is because there's actually no class bonus. So that's going to have an effect on it. And part of the reason you don't see it is because even if it's offered, a lot of people won't pick it. There's partly some people who just don't think it's very good. But more importantly, since they tweaked, like since the bucketing got changed, and all the rush cards are no longer misbucketed. Because remember when Witchwood first came out, all the rush minions were bucketed way lower than they should be.
Right. Yeah.
And so all warriors were just like picking all the rush minions and were like, "Oh, this is so great." And then they correctly bucketed the rush minions. So the rush minions are no longer like that much misbucketed. In fact, the best rush minion, the 4-mana one, is Militia Commander. That's actually in the first bucket, which is over bucketing. But that's another story altogether. It's not that much over bucketing. It's kind of an insane card. And then on top of all that, for whatever reason, rush minions are offered less than other class minions in Warrior.
Like systematically.
Yes. Well, not systematically because it's not exactly the same. Like I said, you can't come up with systems for what Blizzard's doing with these offering rates. But all 3 of these, from Militia Commander to Red Band Wasp to Rabid Worgen, you don't get offered as much as you would expect based on Blizzard's rules that they had told us before Micro Adjust or whatever other systems are coming in. So they're there, but oftentimes when you get to your Town Crier, you're like, oh, I don't really have that many rush minions. Maybe I don't take a Town Crier. And that's fair. So Town Crier is actually a little overrated in our tier list right now through no fault of our own, but just because we assumed a certain offering rate, and Blizzard is not giving us that offering rate. So this is just one of those things, right? Like we did our best with the information we had, and we didn't even know it until we reviewed some stats more heavily, and now we realize rush minions are for whatever reason not being offered as much. Don't take Town Crier, guys, unless you already have rush minions. Otherwise, you're gonna maybe potentially need to give up some value to get your rush minions in. But again, this card doesn't need that many rush minions. Like, you should be fine. And it's not like Swift Messenger or Ghanaian Royal Guard are misbucketed, and they both exist. So This is the less affected card. The more affected card, and this is not to say, like, don't pick this card. This card is heavily misbucketed. It's Woodcutter's Axe. We rated a 192. But it's not that good, because you will have far fewer rush minions than we thought you would have. But it's still, like, no matter where it comes out, it's still going to be a heavily misbucketed card. Because it is in the... Let me see which bucket it's in. It's in the third bucket. And it's a 2-drop. And a card with initiative. You will take this card whenever you are offered this card, without question. It could not have an ability, and you will take this card when it is offered to you in the third bucket. So... and remember, your warrior, you still need 1/2s. You need about 6 of them. Unless you're building a very specific deck with a lot of taunts and a lot of armor obs. And armoring is also over bucketed by Blizzard. So these are things. But once again, Woodcutter's Axe, it's a 192. It's still a really great card. It's misbucketed by Blizzard. You should take it. But it's not that ridiculous premium that we thought it was going to be, because we were living in the world of before the hotfix, where you just saw these rush minions everywhere for warrior.
Sounds good. And you're right. I really do not see Town Crier a lot. And for Woodcutters, I do see Woodcutter's Axe, though. Like, I do see that. And that's the effect of the bucketing system, right? And for...
Well, not even the bucketing system, also just offering rates. I really don't know. Like, I don't know how much Town Crier is even being offered.
Yeah. And for something like this as well...
And it's an epic, and it's a minion, right? You should not expect to see it as often as Woodcutter's Axe to begin with.
What I'm hoping for is, from this point onward, that we never see anything like what they did with, like, not only Flame Strike, but like Vicious Fledgling, right? In which they just, because what you can do is, instead of banning a card, you can effectively ban a card.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Like, and the only cards in which you can't effectively ban are like the world beater cards, right? Like the ones in which you can't misbucket them, but like, because they are just going to be selected every single freaking time. But
Ultimate Infestation.
Yeah, something like that, right? Like, so for something like Vicious Fledgling, like, instead of saying like, no, like, we don't want this card existing, you could just say like, you want this card, like, you really want this card? Okay, then pick it over the Primordial Drake, right? Like, pick it over, like the super premium cards, like pick it over the Steed, pick it over the Vine Cleaver then. And people, like, and so you'll still see something like that card in decks in which people really want to go for, or if it really fits in their deck. And you know what, every once in a while, I think that's fine. But hopefully, because of the tools that Blizzard has now, like, we won't see that. And just because of the effects that we see here, like, you almost never see some of these new cards that have come out. You almost never see some like pretty good cards. And it's just because it's not about how good the card is now. It's just about how good it is relative to the other cards that's being offered with it.
Yeah. I don't have any more to say about this topic at this point. I think we've said what we needed to say, and we're just kind of like, Blizzard's going to do something. The system clearly has issues. Like, what are they going to do? Or we're bringing this back to the very first statement, right? Merps is moving. It's in a transitional period. Arena's in a transitional period right now. Arena's in a very heavily transitional period right now, where you can expect the game to look totally different 2 months from now with 100% guarantee.
Yeah, and the main hope is just like no matter oh, no, sorry, not no matter what, but like whatever Blizzard does past this point, hopefully they are still in the mindset of we our work is not finished, you
Yeah.
know, and that this 2 week period in which they haven't done anything is just them sort of like collecting more data and wanting to make a more substantive change, right? Something like that. If they are just looking at it, it's like, you know what, I think it's okay. Let's just like let it be for a while. That's definitely not what we want. Like Blizzard, when you decided to go for this bucket system, you guys essentially committed to a few months of
Hmm.
a very painful like sort of adjustment period, right? And you guys have to just basically just keep on going, keep on following through, and we will work with you definitely because we believe that this change and the idea behind this change is good, but man, it's something in which like you know you guys made the leap and now like we just have to keep on going like otherwise it's something in which if you don't put the work in we do end up with a lot of frustration, right, on both sides. Like the casual players are frustrated, the hardcore players are frustrated because it's even more of a barrier, like you've erected even more of like a wall or just a barrier to entry to like for high level play.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see.
For from our end, I know you guys may be wondering why. Like, I haven't written an article yet, and I usually do this when big things happen about how to like actually attack a meta. We haven't made videos about it. If you look at the lightforge.com, it still looks like the old website. Like, we haven't told you what the buckets are even, and it's because we don't have that information, and it's going to keep changing. So we're kind of content providers, and we're unsure how to provide content when it comes to,
Yeah.
like, you notice, right, like Shady hasn't done anything either, like Crip hasn't done it. Like, it's hard to attack this thing when we're in this transitional period, because anything you do has a very high percent of being totally, like, all the work you've done being totally worthless in a week. um
Right.
and like a high likelihood. It's not like, oh no, it might go away. Like, it will go away. It's just a matter of whether it's useless next week or if it'll be a useful information 2-3 weeks from now. So we could do these Lightforge podcasts and like kind of like keep you up to speed with what we are knowing and where we are thinking of. The last Lightforge in particular is like my current thoughts on how to deal with a paladin rogue meta very specifically. But that's kind of all we can do that makes it in any way, shape, or form like worth our time right now in a transition meta. Like, I have so many things I want to do and ideas I want to like put out, but every time I start on it, I'm like, I have this is going to I know this is going to be useless in a very short period of time, and this is going to take me like 15 hours to like put together, and I'm not going to put that time in for something that's going to be worthless very, very soon.
Right. Which is also why we are always super appreciative of anyone who does do work to illuminate sort of what the current meta, right? Taro and everyone else who pour over sort of the stats just to get us the buckets, just to get us sort of an idea of what goes on underneath the hood.
All right. Well, that's it for the Life Force this week. Until next week, this is Oddwicked Up.
This is Merps. Good luck, guys.